We only get 60 to 80% of the chips we order, and in some cases, only 50%.
We planned to add 16 assembly lines from 8, but now we slowed down and only added 12.
Well, for more, let's go to Malcolm Penn. He's a global semiconductor industry analyst and runs the research firm Future Horizons in London. Welcome to the program, Malcolm. Now, can we take a look at the broader chip shortage first? How did it get to this point, and why aren't chip makers able to meet this demand?
Well, this has really been an issue which has been building for a while. The problem has been a lack of investment in the industry for several years now. The industry has just really been keeping pace with demand and not really investing very much more for the growth that was expected. And so now we suddenly find that the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March-June timeframe really started to recover very strongly in the third quarter, and that used up any excess capacity there were.
Okay, now I think many of us are aware of just how prevalent chips are in things like mobile phones, laptops, computers, but I was surprised to learn about the impact that this shortage has had in the automaker sector. Why have they been particularly hard hit?
Okay, well, semiconductors are the unsung hero of everything. I mean, we can't survive without semiconductors, but nobody really appreciates that. The problem with the car industry is they seem to have failed to understand that the lead times to produce these devices is really very long. You're talking about, for their industry, between 4 and 6 months. And they were very late to realize that the chip market overall was recovering, and they were even later in placing their orders on the chip suppliers. They're so used to being mandated by their just-in-time delivery systems, they hadn't realized that this doesn't work for semiconductors. You have to order the parts 6 months before you need them.
So these chips that are used in cars and other vehicles are actually quite different to the ones that are found in, say, handheld gadgets?
No, not really. They're all made pretty much the same way. The production lead time for all chips is 4 months. And with the automotive, they tend to then have to go to a subcontractor who builds them into modules, which then get shipped to the car manufacturer, and that adds a little bit more lead time on them. So it's a long lead time industry. It takes 4 months.
So which car makers in particular are you aware of that have been particularly hard hit right now?
I think they probably all are. The only one that seems to be faring a little bit better is Toyota, because they had a nasty shock in the Fukushima disaster in 2011, where a lot of the Japanese semiconductor factories got hit by the tsunami. And I think after that, they built a little bit more inventory and had a little bit more buffer in the supply chain. But other people, other car industry, still seem to work on the basis they don't need inventory and they can order at the drop of a hat. And it just doesn't work that way.
So is this a predicament that's facing car makers right now? Is that a result of perhaps an unexpected uptick in demand for cars and poor planning on their part?
Certainly, I think that the uptick in cars has been visible, I think, for some time. The uptick in the whole industry has been very visible since at least September, even October, August of last year. So it's been very visible that the industry was recovering and was in a really hyper growth phase. And in the fourth quarter, it was growing dramatically. So they should have been aware of that. And if they weren't, they really were asleep at the wheel.
Interesting, so to speak. Now, everyone from General Motors and the American Automotive Policy Council to Japanese car makers and even the German Economy Minister Peter Altmaier have really made representations to Taiwan in particular to really meet this shortage and growing demand for chips. Why is it that Taiwan is in question here, and in particular the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company? Can other chip makers fill that void?
Well, Taiwan has done an incredibly good job. The main company there is TSMC, and they've done an incredibly good job of being a subcontractor for pretty much all of the world's semiconductor manufacturers. So a lot of semiconductor companies, in fact most, no longer make the chips themselves. They subcontract that process out to a foundry, and TSMC has the major share of that. So really, they are the first person to go to when you need to have more, but they run a very tight ship, and they only put in capacity in response to firm customer demand. So if you didn't order these chips 6 months ago, there isn't the capacity there for you.
Okay, and what about companies like Intel, another big chip maker? Do you expect that perhaps some of the bosses at that American company might be looking on this crisis and perhaps looking to fill that void somehow, or are they just not equipped to do that?
Partly they're not equipped to do that, but even if they could, it's still 4 months, because if you gave them the order today, you really wouldn't see the parts until 4 months' time. It just takes that amount of time to make these in the factory.
Okay, Malcolm Penn, thank you so much for shining some light on this really interesting issue and for joining us from London.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.